So, hello everybody, my name is Dan Daggett. I'm a security solution architect at Phantom. I'm here today to talk to you about the Nietzsche, not Petya outbreak that happened this summer shortly after the WannaCry incident. I'm going to just go ahead and give you a spoiler now. I saw the talk was labeled ransomware. It wasn't ransomware, it was just destructive. So our story starts the 27th of June, 2017, in the country of Ukraine. Ukraine's a beautiful country. It's in Eastern Europe, bordered by Russia to the east and northeast. We've got Belarus to the northwest, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia to the west, and Romania and Moldova to the southwest. In terms of size, the Ukraine is the largest country entirely within Europe. It's the 46th largest country in the world. I thought this was important. I didn't realize how big the Ukraine was until I started researching this, but it's a pretty large country. It's got a population of about 42.5 million people. So this is the reason that while this story starts in Ukraine, it almost immediately becomes an international problem. So I want you guys to remember this picture as we get deeper into our story here. So what happened? Medoc was used in a supply chain attack to distribute malware to victims in the Ukraine. So you've got attackers with stolen credentials. They had access to the Medoc update server, and they used that access to distribute an update to all of their customers that included a backdoor. And then later, they came along and used that backdoor to wipe out all the computers with Nyetya. So what is Medoc? It's a widely deployed accounting package created by a Ukrainian company named Intellect Service. But something like 80% of the companies in Ukraine use this software. And they don't have a choice. There's only a couple options. And if they want to interface with the Ukrainian tax system, they've got to use one of these options. So think of like TurboTax pushed all of your computers malware, and then later came along and wiped them all out. Except you didn't have a choice, and you had to use TurboTax, and you couldn't file them on paper. So the whole Medoc story, all in itself, I could probably spend an hour talking about. Well, maybe not me personally, but somebody could. ESET did a great analysis of the backdoor. I'd encourage you to go read this article. If you're interested in that, they do a pretty technical analysis of it. All of these links I'll give you here at the end for every one of the headlines you'll see here. And then I would also read this one. The Sisqo Talos team, they responded to Medoc's cry for help. They realized something was going on and that they were part of it, but they didn't know what was going on. So the Talos team responded, and then they wrote up a blog about their firsthand experience investigating the update server and what happened. So because of the ESETs had published that, we know that the backdoor was pushed out 3 different times. So first, the 14th of April, in red there, again on the 15th of May, and then last on the 22nd of June, just less than a week before the Nietzsche was pushed out. So the backdoor, it was pretty clever. You can say with reasonable certainty that they had access to the Medoc source code to write this backdoor. So they pushed it out. It gives you some commands. It was clever. So it was clever in that normally malwares can use something like a command and control server, so they can talk to the machines and do things. They had this backdoor actually use Medoc's update server. So it acted like the normal update server, except for that data could be smuggled to the update server, and the update server could send commands back to the backdoor through HTTP cookies. So the update server normally just worked via the URL, so via Git. And so you could hide stuff in the cookies, and it would talk to the backdoor and the update server. It gave you a variety of commands here, as you can see, 6 of them. The one that we're interested in is Autopay Load, which we can say with pretty high certainty that this is the one that was used to distribute Nyetya. So the Autopay Load function. They take an executable file, base64 encoded, put in a cookie, sent off to the victim. The victim would unbase64 it. It would drop the DLL, and then it would use run DLL32.exe. You see down there near the bottom, and it would execute that DLL. This matches exactly with what the forensics investigators found when they went and looked into this, as far as distributing Nyetya. So how was the backdoor distributed? So Taylor started investigating. They found the configuration file for the Nginx server on the update server had been modified. But the modification date was after the attack. And when they looked at it, it was exactly the same as it used to be. So they know it was modified and then put back to what it was. So that was kind of a dead end. But they found thousands of these entries in the log files. And from these entries, they were able to figure out that what they did is they modified Nginx to redirect, you can see that IP address down there, the bottom left. So it redirected the request off to a malicious IP that they had. This offered advantages. They didn't have to put any of their tool set on the Medoc update server, and they left a minimal footprint. When they investigated this IP address, dev0 had been put all over the hard drive. There was nothing there to investigate. So from 9/11 to 12/31 UTC, the update server redirected every single incoming update request to the malicious IP. And for a little more than 3 hours, Nyetya was pushed out using the Autopay Load command. So Nyetya, it started as a binary version of Petya that was modified for this attack. When I say a binary version, they weren't working with the source code for Petya. These are tough ones. They actually took a compiled version of it, and then they hex edited it or something. They modified it to make Nyetya. So to understand Nyetya, first we've got to know what Petya is. The first Petya ransomware, so this was actual ransomware. It was released around March 2016. It was unique because most ransomwares would go through and encrypt a file at a time. Petya would deny you access to your whole system. They wipe out your boot sector, and they modify low-level structures on your disk. So you got infected with it. This is what you'd see. This is common enough. They tell you how to get the Tor browser, point you to a couple onion addresses, and then they give you a decryption code. You go to one of those onion addresses, they're going to tell you, hey, give us some Bitcoin along with this, and we'll give you the private key that was used to encrypt your system so you can get your files back. The name, oh boy. So you're going to see it under lots of different names. This is Nyetya. I'm not going to go any further into Petya. But because it was based on Petya, it was really confusing in the beginning. You would see reports about it, and they'd be calling it Petya or this, or sort of Petya, but not Petya. It was a little confusing. It certainly was for me, at least. In the end, I chose Nyetya. I like the combination of Nyet and Petya. The Sisqo Talos team ended up choosing it as well, so it worked out nicely for this. So what's the differences? How did they modify this ransomware? They added 4 different ways for it to propagate to other computers. And due to how extremely proficient these mechanisms were, this attack grew from Ukraine very quickly to affecting the whole global community. So the first 2 ways were vulnerabilities patched by MS-17010. It was Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance. If you haven't heard these names, Eternal Blue was what WannaCry used. Eternal Romance was another exploit, another SMB version 1 exploit. They were both released at the same time by the shadow brokers on the 14th of April, down there in red, which may just be coincidence, but it happens to also match up with the other red date on the first time that the backdoor was pushed out. May not be the same people, but the timing was sure good. Well, maybe they just saw that and thought it was a good chance. I'm not sure. So it would use those exploits. If you weren't patched, it would spread through that. It would query your network, it'd figure out what was there, and it would just try to infect everything. If that didn't work, it would also use WMI as well as PSExec. So WMI is just a normal Windows administration tool. So is PSExec to use these unique credentials. So it was distributed with a tool that was based off of Mimikatz. Mimikatz allows you to scrape credentials from a variety of different places. You could use it to write yourself a golden ticket for the network. In this case, it would pull the credentials, and then it used one of these 2 tools to spread itself across your network. So even if you were patched, if your administrator had logged into that machine that got infected recently, it would steal those credentials, and there's nothing you could really do to stop it beyond like network segmentation, maybe having something set up to alert you on that. So this is what Nyetya looked like. I'm going to point out just a couple differences here. First off, they don't send you off to an onion address. They're just like, here's the Bitcoin address. Probably the most watched Bitcoin address right after this happened. And then even worse, like here's an email address to email me that key with. Well, that email address was shut down almost immediately. So how are you supposed to get your key back? Well, they found out later that you couldn't get the key back because the way it was modified, it never even saved the key. So there was no intent on getting your files back. They were just destroying the machines. All right, so let's talk about the global impact that this had. It was very targeted at Ukraine, but as I've said a couple times, it affected most of the world. So it took place the 27th of June. By the morning of the 28th, over 150 countries had been affected. In Europe alone, the UK, Ukraine, Russia, France, Spain, Denmark, Germany, Poland, Belarus, Lithuania, Norway, Netherlands, Holland, Romania, and that was just Europe. But the malware spread much further, and it hit Asia, North America, South America, and the Middle East. So let's just pick 4 companies, and we'll talk about them and the impact that Nyetya had on them. So remember that picture back in the beginning? So first up here is Maersk. Maersk has been the largest container ship and supply vessel operator in the world since 1996. This isn't a Docker slide. Reuters reported they've got over 76 ports, and they were one of the many firms hit by Nyetya. Less than 2 weeks out from the attack, and Maersk has said it's too early to predict the financial impact that this is going to have, and everything's back to normal as far as our operations go. By the time August rolled around, we're getting a little better idea of the impact that this had. Their CEO said even at the 300 million mark, things could have been much worse. At least there was no data breach or data loss. Due to the secretive nature of shipping, it would have been devastating. I'm thinking this must have been kind of hard for Equifax to hear as they were in the middle of quietly trying to cover up their own problem. So in the end, Maersk came out and said it's going to wipe off 300 million off their profits for the third quarter. So there's our first 300 million. Next up, we've got FedEx. We all know FedEx. 3 weeks out from the initial attack, their shares had already dropped 3.4%, and the company said that the financial impact and the results are likely to be material, or maybe even permanent. And we've dropped another 300 million to Nyetya. The company executives, they've also acknowledged they've yet to restore their operations back to full, and delivering sales are continue to suffer. So this is, well, we're in September now, and they're still trying to get things back in order. So now we're at to 600 million. Third on the chopping block, we've got Reckitt Benckiser. This time a manufacturer, not a distributing and shipping company. So their supply chains now affected them. So Reckitt Benckiser, the company behind dental cleaning products, the Nurofen painkiller, Durex condoms, and more, has confirmed that some of its operations have been hit by the attack and will not be fully restored until August. It's going to cost some revenue, 130 million. But it wasn't only monetary. They lost their heads of information technology, human resources, marketing, and their developing markets. It was the biggest management change in like the last 6 years for them. So next up is Mandela International. It's one of the world's largest snack companies. And the Financial Times put out an article, but they've got a paywall up, so I've resorted to Twitter here. So the makers of Oreo cookies and Cadbury chocolates estimated the attack would shave 3 percentage points from the second quarter growth, which comes out to $192 million. So we add it all up. We get 300 million from FedEx, 300 million from Maersk, 130 million from Reckitt Benckiser, a handful of change for the executives, 192 million from Mandela International, and we've got $1 billion in damage, with just 4 companies. And there are certainly a ton of other countries that are companies that are affected. I've just picked the 4 global ones here. This isn't even touching on the damage in the Ukraine. So at this point, I'd say there's definitely blood in the water. But it wasn't all bad news. The Dutch Post DHL saw no material impact from the cyber attacks in the Ukraine at the end of June. In fact, they've seen increased volumes as their rivals cope with the results of this attack. So it was good for somebody. All right, so this is a TechCrunch headline, but their prediction actually came from the Kaspersky App Trends report for Q2. My favorite part of this whole TechCrunch article was actually this image. So I'm going to read from the Kaspersky report. Destructive malware, disguised as ransomware, will continue to be a problem with the continued release of tools, exploits from the dumps like Vault 7 and shadow brokers. It's going to be an alarming new trend to deal with. So whoever this attacker was, they gave up the ability to own like 80% of the businesses in Ukraine. And they wouldn't give up that ability. I wouldn't think they'd give up that ability unless they knew they already had another way back in. So somebody was willing to do this on the national stage, burn all of their assets in a big bonfire for the world to see. Was it a cover-up? Probably. But the article ends up saying it's not sure, but Booz Allen Cyber Foresight report here says that it may be. What they were able to connect was they found 4 virus total users that had uploaded tools used by the Telebots group, and they had also uploaded files before the Nyetchya outbreak that was used in the Nyetchya outbreak, and they were the only ones. So they were able to connect it back to this Telebots group. All right, so who's the Telebots group? According to the experts at ESET, the gang is exploiting Telebots malware all across banks in Ukraine. And they think that the Telebots is actually the Black Energy group, and they've just evolved into Telebots. And if you haven't heard of the Black Energy group, this goes back to attacks on the Ukrainian power grid. So they've hit the power grid, they've hit the banks, they wiped out all the businesses' computers. It certainly on the surface appears that somebody's got it out for Ukraine. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. You guys have Google. You can go read up on it. It's really interesting. So what do we do to improve security? I'm not going to spend a lot of time here talking about foundational things that could have been done, like patching, antivirus, disaster recovery plans, offline backups with tested restores, network segmentation, and defense in depth. I think these things would be best covered just by buying a copy of Defensive Security Handbook. So I've kind of boiled it down to a high-level top 5. So first off, just accept that things are going to go wrong. Number 2, monitor outside. Don't just rely on your humans or just one feed. 3, you can set thresholds to alert on things. I saw reports of like 10,000 machines being wiped out in like less than 10 minutes. Like, if I got one machine logging into that many other machines, like I've got a problem. So that kind of behavior, maybe I could have spotted that and locked them off the network or something to that effect. Number 4, having the tools to respond, both in people, having an IR and a SOC, having multiple event sources, having people out there hunting, improving your security. And last, number 5 is don't become complacent. Things are going to continue to change. So just because you're okay today doesn't mean you're going to be okay tomorrow. So be proactive, do threat hunting. And don't turn your back on the kids. So I just take a moment to thank my employer here. They're actually paying for my time to talk to you, so thank you. We're hiring a bunch of positions. Come hunt me down and talk to me if you like. I'll talk to you more about it. Got a bunch of other links here. In fact, give me just a second. These are a bunch of links that I didn't use in the presentation. All right. So I just tweeted out the slide deck with all my notes. So you've got all the links now. You hit up my Twitter right there. And that's all I've got for you. So if you guys have questions, I'd be happy to answer questions at this point.
With ransomware having gone out, I hear that it's the tool to create And then the NSA playbooks been published in the dark web. So are we foreseeing that it's going to be more prolific on global attacks?
Okay. So the question is, there's a bunch of these tools for making this are out on the dark net. The NSA exploits and toolkits are out there. Are we going to be seeing this as more prolific? That's a good point, and I believe so. I think the bar's been lowered. This whole thing was hobbled together out of other tools. You know, they took Petya. They had two different versions of PS exec that they included with it, a 32 and a 64-bit version. WMI was already installed, so they're doing like pen testing type maneuvers there. They just patched together a bunch of things and sent it out. You know, and it affected the whole world. Like, and it's out there as well. So I would have to agree. I think that it's showing people like, hey, you know, you don't have to write it all from scratch. Like, you can kind of piece things together. And so yes, there's places predicting that. Yeah.
This might be a silly question, but what do you think is
The best defense against ransomware? I don't know if I'm qualified to answer this. I just like to read a lot. So what do I think the best defense against ransomware? Educating your users. A lot of times it's happening through like phishing type emails, people clicking on things, having your systems patched, in these cases at least, because they used exploits that were out there and had already been patched. I think a big part of that is educating your users, to not click on things. Anybody else? Yeah.
Do you see a shift in accountability for attacks like these? I mean, a couple companies fire a couple people, but there's millions of dollars of damages. Equifax,
Right.
move one guy out. Oh, problem solved, right?
Right. I sure hope so. I don't know what the answer should be, but when the Equifax thing happened, it's like, how can it not be? You know, I mean, that's like half of Americans' personal information out there. Like, I think we need some kind of better accountability. You know, I don't know what that is, but yeah. All right, thank you.